Hello students, welcome to Distinction Learning Platform, and on this platform you find explanation to difficult topics, you find quizzes, tests, a lot of stuff. So before we begin our lessons, make sure that you subscribe so that you can be updated with all upcoming videos. To make the story short, let us begin. In this video, we are talking about cell specialization, okay? Basically, that is under biology for secondary level. So now, what is cell specialization? Cell specialization, as you can see in our body, we've got a lot of cells, and all the cells that we have, like the muscle cells, red blood cells, neuronal cells, all the cells that we have, they all come from what? A single parent. So let us understand about cell specialization. What am I talking about? I'm saying all the cells in the body, they come from what? A single what? Cell. A single cell, let's just say, if you remember, if you talk about fertilization, after fertilization occurs, there's a substance or a structure or a cell that's going to be produced, which we call zygote, before it starts dividing. So from there, let's say after fertilization, we're going to have what? A zygote. Okay, a zygote basically is going to have what? A single cell. After some times, this zygote will start what? Dividing. Okay. Now, all the cells in the body, they will come from what? A zygote. Okay, this zygote, it will come from. So let's say muscle cell, xylem cells, tissue cells, everything they will come from what? That zygote. What is zygotic? What? Cell. Okay. Now, if a cell, now let's say, if this parent cell, let's just call it a parent cell. If this parent cell decides itself to divide or change into something that is useful, let's say maybe change into a red blood cell, the famous one. Maybe change into what? A red blood cell. Okay. Maybe this same parent cell changes into what? A white blood cell. Okay, white blood cell. Or maybe into what? A selected what? Cell. Into what? A selected cell. All these three processes that I've talked about, a single parent or an already existing cell is changing into what? Another cell. So what do we call that? That is what? Cell specialization. So cell specialization is what? It's a process in which what? An already existing parent cell is going to what? Change into what? Something that can withstand in the what? That can what? Perform a certain function. Like let's say if you talk about the red blood cell is able to what? Transport oxygen because it has undergone what? Cell specialization. If you look at a parent cell can't carry oxygen to all parts of the body because it hasn't yet undergone what we call cell specialization. So in short, the reason why cell specialization is there is to make sure that a cell perform its what suitable function. Okay, so we'll talk about cells that can undergo cellular specialization, like isolated cells, luteal cells, white blood cells, red blood cell, phloem, xylem, and what? Neurons. Okay, there are also other cells that can undergo, like the muscle cells that haven't included. Okay. So since we've understood about cell specialization, and the other important aspect that we need to understand is what? Cell specialization is the same as what? Cell differentiation, okay? But cell specialization is different from what? Cell proliferation. Proliferation basically is to the cells are just dividing, becoming many, okay? But cell specialization, the already existing cell is what? Developing some certainly important features so that it can what? Perform its suitable function. So that's about the cell specialization. So the other term that we can use is what? Differentiation. This is the other term that you can use for cell specialization. Okay. So what do we say about cell specialization? Let's put a definition for that. So we're saying a process in which an already existing cell develops features that helps itself, that helps to perform various functions. Okay, so that is what I was talking about. If a cell changes, basically it's coming from one cell to another, and that cell that has been differentiated into is going to have new features that the parent cell didn't have. So that is what we call cell specialization. A process in which an already existing cell, develops features that helps to perform what? Various function. Now, let's talk about selected cells. So what are selected cells? So selected cells, these cells, where you can find them in what? Very two important what? Region in the body. You can find them in the what? Respiratory tract, because they help to sweep out what? The dust particles that enter into the respiratory tract. Where else can you find it? In the oviduct? So let's talk about the location here. So the location where you can find selected cells is where you can find in the what? Respiratory tract. Okay, that's the first location. The other location where you can find selected cells is where you can find it in the what? Oviduct. Why can you find it in the oviduct? Because it's going to help to move the fertilized egg, or maybe the ovum that hasn't been fertilized, toward the what? The uterus. That's the reason why it's there. Okay, and the respiratory tract. The reason why it is sweeping out something is because of what? The presence of what we call this cytoplasmic outgrowth, which we call cilia. Okay, so what do we call this? So we call them what? Cilia. Okay, these are the ones that sweep out what? Dust particles or the oviduct towards something. Okay, now what is the function of that? So the function of the selected cell is what? Is to do what? What did we say? So we said is to what? We said is to move dust particles from where? From respiratory what? Tract. That's the first what? Function. What is the other function? Also to move what? The ovum towards the what? Uterus. This is what we said. Okay, two important functions. Now let's talk about the adaptation. Adaptation feature. So adaptation, what does it mean? It means that it features now the cilia that it has compared to what? Other cells. So the features the selected cells they are going to develop that you can't find from any other cell. That is what we call adaptation features, or the adaptation. What is that? The first adaptation is what? They've got what? These are cytoplasmic outgrowth. So it has what? Cytoplasmic outgrowth called what? Cilia. Okay, this is the first the first feature. And the other thing that you can think of is that this here they don't just move on their own. They don't just perform this function as something. So basically they are going to have what? A lot of mitochondria in the what? In their cytoplasm. Okay, that's the reason. Remember that mitochondria is an organelle that's going to what? That has the function of what? Production of what? Energy via the process called respiration. The energy is in form of what we call ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Okay? Yeah. So now let's continue. So this is the thing about what? The selected cells. Now let's go to the what? Root hair cell. Root hair cell will do the same as this one, okay? Where you can find them? Where can you find the root hair cell? So the root hair cell, where you can find them is just the tip of the what? Tip of the roots. Just there, that's why you can find what? Root hair cell. What is the function of the root hair cell? The function of the root hair cell is to what? Make sure that it's going to absorb what? Mineral, salt, and also what? Water from the what? From the ground. Okay? So just absorption of what? Mineral, salt, and water. So what we're saying, the base function of this one is what? Absorption of what? Salts, mineral salts. So let's just say M, mineral salts, and what? Water. Okay, that is the base function of what? Root hair cell. What are the adaptation of this root hair cell? So adaptation, remember that the feature that you can only find on the what? On this cell that you can't find it somewhere else. So what is the first feature? That is there. As you can see, this one, this is what? An outgrowth, okay? Elongated growth. So this one is the one that helps in the absorption of what? Mineral salt and what? Water. So we are saying presence of what? Elongated outgrowth. What do we call that? That is the root hair, okay? That's a root hair. So let's put R-H-A-I-R. That is root hair. So that's a elongated what? Outgrowth. What is the other thing? The other thing that you can also take note is that these, they don't need to have what we call the chloroplast, okay? Photosynthesis doesn't happen in this type of what cells, which is the root hair cell. So they don't have what chloroplast, because we know that in the chloroplast, that's why you can find what. That's where photosynthesis takes place, okay? And like if you look at the palisade cells, that's where maximum photosynthesis takes place, because they are located in the like palisade layer from the internal part of the leaf, okay? But these, they don't have what chloroplast. So let's put this one means it doesn't have what chloroplast. But what is the other important aspect that you can talk about here? If they don't have chloroplast, they are going to have what? A lot of what? Mitochondria. Why having mitochondria? Because for this absorption, if you look at the absorption of ions, which is mineral salt it has to use what? Energy, or ATP, okay? Because if you look at the movement of ions from one location to another, that is what we call active transport, okay? Active transport has to use what? Energy. That's why it has to also have a lot of what? Mitochondria. Same applies here. It also had a lot of mitochondria, because that energy was needed for cilia to start what? Functioning. Okay? Boom, boom, boom. Let's continue to another one. Yes. Let's go to white blood cells. So what are white blood cells? So white blood cells, basically, these are the cells of the body that fight against what? Infections and also foreign invaders, and a lot of what? Things that can go wrong in our body. They also help in the repair of maybe if you injured yourself, they also help in that what? Process. How many types of white blood cells do we have? We have two types of white blood cells. We've got this one, this guy with the fine nucleus. So this is a nucleus with fine nucleus. This is what we call, okay, we call it phagocytes, okay. Then this one is what we call a lymphocyte. And remember that the other term that we use for white blood cells, we call them what? Leukocytes. So that's the other term that we can use for all white blood cells. That's the other name. So now we've got two types of white blood cells. We've got phagocyte and what? Lymphocyte, okay. For phagocyte, there are a lot of types of phagocyte. You are going to find there will be eosinophils, basophils, neutrophils, macrophages, so a lot of them, okay? Now, what is the function of these white blood cells? We know that it's to fight against foreign invaders or infections, but what is the specific function for this one? So let's go for this one. As you can see, it has this type of nucleus, a fine nucleus, which is a looped nucleus. What is the function of that? The function of this one is to what? Engulf bacteria or foreign invaders. So here the function of this one is what? Engulf bacteria, or let's just say microorganisms. So let's just say microorganisms. So we use the microorganism or bacterial infections. It's going to engulf so that it kills that what? Bacteria by what? The process called what? Phagocytosis. Okay. What is the other one? Apart from this one now, this is a lymphocyte. Lymphocyte doesn't do phagocytosis, so like engulfing. It produces what we call, so this one produces what we call antibodies and what? Antitoxins. Antibodies and antitoxins. So these also helps to what? Fight against what? Infection. And toxins are going to neutralize toxins that are coming from where? Bacteria. Because bacteria, if they enter into your body, they produce what? Toxins, so that they can injure what? Your body tissues. So to prevent that, lymphocytes, they are going to produce antitoxins that are going to destroy toxins coming from the bacteria. Okay. Antibodies, what do? They are also produced by the lymphocyte, but they all go to kill the what? the bacteria. Okay. Now, what are the adaptation of these two white blood cells? Adaptation features that are very, very important, or features that you can use to identify what white blood cells or leukocytes. What is the first one? The first one, we look at the what? The nucleus. It has what? Lobed nucleus. The first one, it has lobed nucleus, which is what? For the phagocyte. The phagocyte has a lobed nucleus. Lymphocyte has a what? As you can see, this nucleus is more like it's almost covered in the whole cytoplasm. It's large like that. So it has what? Large nucleus. Okay, almost covered in the whole cytoplasm. What else? These white blood cells, these are the fan cells. They do something else. They also they move on their own. Sometimes they can move against the direction of what? The blood flow. Okay. So what are we saying? White blood cells, they move on their own so that they can, maybe if there is a foreign invader or a bacteria, they can start following that bacteria on their own. What we call that movement is one of the adaptation as well. That is what we call amoeboid movement. So we call it what? Amoeboid movement. Very, very important. Okay. Amoeboid movement. So it has a lot of things that you can use to identify white blood cells. Others, they can talk about maybe cytoplasm. So it has a lot of mitochondria because it also needs ATP to start moving, to start killing bacteria. So it's going to have a lot of cytoplasm. But these are the major adaptation features that we can talk about white blood cells. Let's go to red blood cells. Red blood cells are what? These are the cells that carries what? Oxygen to all parts of the body, as well as what? Carbon dioxide. What's the function of this? This is the simplest one. Carries what? Carries oxygen and what? Plus carbon dioxide to all parts of the what? Of the body. So carrying oxygen to all tissues and carrying carbon dioxide from the what? From the tissues to the lungs, so that the carbon dioxide can be what? Can be breathed out of the body. Okay, that is the function of red blood cells. Now, red blood cells, they've got also their own what? Adaptation features. What are those? So they have the first important one. The reason why they look red is because of what? They've got the red pigment called hemoglobin. So what's the first adaptation feature? Contains what? HB. So let me just say HB. That is what we call hemoglobin. Okay, they've got what? Hemoglobin. What else? Okay, what else apart from that? They don't have what? A nucleus. If you look at the red blood cell, the reason why they die after 120 days is because they don't have a nucleus, and that absence of that nucleus, they are going to give more space for hemoglobin to be there and oxygen, so that there's more room for oxygen to be carried to all parts of the body, and also as well as carbon dioxide. Okay, those are the adaptation features of what? Red blood cell. But there's a lot to talk about the red blood cells. Like if we start talking about the groups, like the blood groups blood group A, B, C, blood group A, B, then blood group O, we use what we call antigens on the surface of red blood cells. So a lot about red blood cells, what we'll talk about in future videos. Okay, then let's talk about another one, phloem. Where can you find the phloem? Okay, phloem can be found in the what? In the plants. Okay, in the plants. Now, what's the function of phloem? Phloem, they help in the what? Translocation of what? End product of what? Manufactured food, like what? Glucose, sucrose, like that. Okay, so what are we saying? So here, phloem, the function of phloem is to carry what? Is to transport what? Transport manufactured what? Manufactured food. Okay, that is the function of what? Phloem. Manufactured what? Food. That is what we call, if you are transporting manufactured food like what? Because basically, if you talk about transportation of glucose, it's not glucose itself, it's what? It will be converted into sucrose so that it can be transported like that. Why? Because sucrose is less soluble and less reactive compared to what? Glucose. No wonder before transporting glucose, it has to be converted into what? Sucrose. Okay, so that's the function of phloem. Okay, now if you look at the phloem, it has these parts, these adaptive features, like what? If we, as you can see, this cell is what we call a companion cell. So this cell is what we call a companion cell. Okay, as you can see, these parts are what we call sieve plates. Okay, basically these sieve plates, as you can see, there is a sieve plate. There is what end walls. If you compare it with what the phloem, from the phloem, the what end walls are broken, but on the what on the phloem, the end walls here, the end walls are not what are broken. They are not broken. Okay, they are just perforated. If they are perforated, basically they are going to form what we call sieve plate. So those are the adaptive what features. What's the first adaptation features is what presence of what companion cell. So what's the first one? Presence of what companion cell. What's the function of companion cell? The function of companion cell is to make sure that it provides what ATP to everything that is going on with that phloem cell, because that transportation will require what energy, which is ATP. Okay. What else? A sieve plate also. The other adaptation feature is what the presence of what sieve plate. Sieve plate. Remember that these are the what? These are the things that are found on the what end on the neighboring cells, and the end walls are what perforated, forming what sieve plate. Okay, so that's about phloem. Okay, then let's go to xylem. Okay, xylem. What is xylem? Xylem basically this xylem vessel or xylem tissue, whatever. So this xylem tissue, the major function is to transport what water and what mineral salts to the what to the leaf. Okay, so that maybe there will be some process that's going to happen, like photosynthesis. It's because of what these xylem vessels that will transport what all the mineral salt and also water from the what from the roots to the what to the leaves. So what are we saying? This only help in the what transportation. So transports what water and what mineral salts. Okay, transport of water and mineral salts. So what are the adaptation features? We said, what did we say? So there are a lot of parts that you are going to see here. Okay, there are a lot of parts that you are going to see. These are what we call spiral vessels. So here, these are what we call spiral vessels. Okay, these are what we call pitted vessels. Okay. So these are what we call pitted vessels and spiral vessels. So they are those vessels. They just help in the what transportation of what transportation of mineral salts and what water. Okay, but as you can see here, this is a cell. Between these vessels, this is a cell, and also there is also another cell and another. So as you can see, there is a continuity between these neighboring cells. Okay, this end at the end of this cell and also the other end of the cell, they are what there is a space there, which is they are broken. So the end walls of these cells, they are what broken to form what continuous what tube. So what are we saying? So what we are saying is that end walls are what end walls. So end walls are what are broken to form what continuous what tube. So what else apart from that? There is also, if you look at that, there is absence of what protoplasm. Okay, so absence of what? Another adaptation features is what the absence of what protoplasm. What is protoplasm? Protoplasm basically is something that we consider as a living part of the cell. Okay, protoplasm is something that we consider as a what living part of the cell. And what is that? So and these parts are what we call like the cell membrane, cytoplasm, and the nucleus. Those are what protoplasm. That makes up protoplasm. So that's about the xylem tissue. Let's go to the last one, a neuron. A neuron or nerve cell. So a nerve cell, these are the cells that that helps in the what transmission of what electric impulse from the central nervous system to the peripheral. Okay, there are three important what neurons or cells that transmit those electric impulse. There is what we call the nerve cells, and there is what we call this. As you can see, this one is what we call the motor neuron. And this is what we call the ray neuron or interneuron neuron or intermediate. This is what we call sensory neuron. So what are we saying about this? We are saying this is what a motor neuron. Okay, this is what this is the relay neuron, and this is what the sensory neuron. We'll talk about this in the nervous system lessons. Okay, so as you can see, this is the cell body, and these are what we call dendrites. These are what we call dendrites. This is an axon, and this is the axonal terminal. Same applies to this one. This is the cell body, and this is what these are dendrites. These are dendrites. And this is also a cell body. This is what an axon. So what's the function of all these neurons? The function of these neurons is to what? Carry, what are we saying? Carry electric what? Or nerve impulses. So we can use nerve impulse or electric what? Impulses. Carry electric what? Impulses. Okay, from the central nervous system to the what? Peripheral, or from the peripheral to the central nervous system, depending on the type of neuron involved. Okay, what are the adaptation features? So what are the adaptation features on here? So adaptation features, what are the adaptation features? The first one is what? Presence of what? So they are what? Presence of dendrites, like we said. Okay, presence of what? Dendrites. Okay, what else? Presence of what? Axons. Okay, as we talked about. So presence of axons. What else? Okay, also presence of what? Synaptic what? Synaptic knobs. Okay, presence of synaptic knobs, and the other one is what? Presence of what? Nodes of what? Ranvia. A lot of them. There are a lot here. Okay, so these are the adaptation features that a neuron develops. So the presence of dendrites, we'll talk about the function in the what? Nervous system. Presence of axons, synaptic knob, and also nodes of Ranvia. Nodes of Ranvia, they help with the what? Transmission of what? Electric impulse to become what? To move what? More faster. Okay, or faster. So that's what we end from under what? Cell specialization. Okay.